آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم آمين. وبعد. We continue with Safinatun Najah by Sheikh Salim ibn Abdullah al-Hadrami rahimahullah. ونفعنا الله بعلومه في الدارين آمين. We also have the commentator, Sheikh Abdullah al-Marbuqi, who translated this book and also added his own additional comments, which have really, provide a lot of guidance and benefit to the student and teacher. So here we're going to read some of the notes from the author, from the commentator. This is on page 71. The commentator says, rahimahullah, Sunan Rawatib. The Sunan Salah before and after Fard Salah. These Sunan are also referred to as Sunan Mu'akkada. They're referred to as Sunan Mu'akkada, and what it means is highly emphasized Sunnahs. So the Sunnahs are two categories. There's Sunan that are Mu'akkada, they're highly emphasized. The Prophet ﷺ, he performed these Sunan daily. It was a regular part of his routine. He would perform these Sunan. And there are other Sunan that aren't Mu'akkada, that the Prophet ﷺ didn't perform daily. Such as, for example, Salat al-Duha. It wasn't done daily. He did it alayhi salatu wasalam at times, he didn't do it at times. The Tahajjud is also, it was consistent because Tahajjud was obligatory for the Prophet ﷺ. So it's not included as Mu'akkada and Rawatib. The Sunan Mu'akkada are Sunnahs that the Prophet would do daily, and even when he missed it, he would make it up. If he missed the Sunnah of Dhuhr, once alayhi salam, he got busy with a guest of travelers, and he was busy dealing with them and hosting them, and he missed the Sunnah of Dhuhr, and Asr came, and then the Prophet he made it up afterwards. So these are rawatib the Prophet adhered to regularly. And so our mashayikh, they teach us and students, these are sunnah that every Muslim should adhere to. Like the sunnah before Fajr, and we're going to get into their names. These are sunnah rawatib we want to adhere to as much as we can. So what are they? He says, the optimal numbers of these are 2 rak'ahs before subh salah. These are 2 rak'ahs before Fajr. 4 rak'ahs before and after Dhuhr. The stronger opinion is 4 before, but 2 after. The other 2 is sunnah, but is not highly emphasized. Does that make sense? Just to make that distinction. So Dhuhr has 8 sunnahs, 8 rak'ah, 4 before, 4 after. The 4 before are highly emphasized. The 2 after are highly emphasized. The 2 after that are not as highly emphasized. Does that make sense? And then 4 rak'ahs before Asr Salah. These are not highly emphasized. These are not highly emphasized, but they're sunnah to pray between Asr and Dhuhr. The adhan and iqam of Asr, there's a hadith says, رحم الله امرأ صلى قبل العصر أربعا أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. May Allah have mercy on a man who prays 4 rak'ahs before Asr. There's a hadith of that meaning. But it's not sunan highly, they're not mu'akkada. So here the author, he actually separates them, I'm sorry. So he says the mu'akkada, I jumped ahead. The mu'akkada is the second section. So here he's giving us a larger list, and then he's going to say the ones on the bottom, they're the highly emphasized. So I'm jumping ahead of the commentator. So 4 rak'ahs before Asr, 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib, and 2 after Isha. These sunnahs, they're all scheduled around the Fard Salah. Right? 2 before Dhuhr, 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, 4 after Dhuhr, 4 before Asr, 2 after Maghrib, 2 after Isha. All these sunnahs are what? Around the Fard Salah. Around the Fard Salah. The Mu'akkada, the emphasized sunnah, consists of 10 rak'ahs. 2 rak'ahs before Subh, 2 rak'ahs before and after Dhuhr. So he said the highly emphasized are just 2, not 4. I know, I've read that it's 4, but here we'll take the position of 2. So if you can't do 4 before Dhuhr, at least do 2. These are highly emphasized. And then 2 after Dhuhr, 2 after Maghrib, 2 after Isha. These are the highly emphasized. So think of it as two levels. The highly emphasized you want to adhere to, and then other than that is the other sunnahs that come after. You do as much as you can. It says in the following part, he says, it is recommended to pray 2 rak'ahs before Maghrib Salah. It is recommended to pray 2 rak'ahs before Maghrib Salah. There's a hadith that commands that. I don't recall the wording of it. But there's a hadith that says, pray before, Sallu qabla al-Maghrib, I think. It says, pray before Maghrib or something of that sort. I recall the hadith. But there's a hadith that tells you pray sunnah before Maghrib. So the sunnah before Maghrib is between the adhan and iqamah. And you can make more than one intention for sunnah. So you can intend, because between adhan and iqamah, you're supposed to make sunnah, right? When you enter the masjid, you're supposed to make sunnah. And you're supposed to make the sunnah 2 rak'ah before Maghrib. You can make all 3 intentions in one prayer. So you can enter the masjid, he made adhan, and you pray sunnah before Maghrib. All 3 salah, you make one intention, you get the ajr for all 3. And if you made wudu, you add that one too, you make it 4. Make sense? You just pray 2 rak'ah, but you get the ajr of 4. 4 salah, 8 rak'ah. You just have to make the intention. Yeah, that's the intention. Make sense?
But no, only for sunnah, right?
For wajib you can't. Only for the sunnah. And not every sunnah, but in this case, for these sunnah, the sunnah between adhan and iqamah, the sunnah of wudu, and the sunnah of entering the masjid, those ones you can combine with any salah. Those ones you can make that intention with any salah. Even the wajib, you can add those to the wajib salah. But only these 3, not the sunnahs before dhuhr. You can't say like, I'm going to do the sunnah before dhuhr with dhuhr. You can't do that. Only these 3. The entering the masjid, making wudu, and adhan and iqamah. You can make adhan and iqamah wouldn't happen because it's before the salah. But wudu and entering the masjid, you can make that intention with the fard salah. Make sense? Okay. He says the sunnah of Jum'ah are the same as for dhuhr salah. The scholars, they debate a lot about the sunnah of Jum'ah. Is the same or not? Less or more? And so the position here is that it's the same as dhuhr. You try to pray 4. So when do you pray the 4? Do you pray while the imam is giving khutbah? No. Once the imam gives khutbah, nobody should pray sunnah except the sunnah of entering the masjid. No other sunnah should be prayed. Not the sunnah between adhan and iqamah, not sunnah for anything. You enter the masjid, you pray 2 rak'ah, and those 2 rak'ahs, you have to keep them very brief. You read Fatiha, you don't make it long, Subhana Rabbil Azim 3 times, nothing more. Short, brief, and because the greater obligation is to listen to the khutbah. You don't add anything. But before the adhan, before the adhan of the khutbah, because therefore Jum'ah, usually there's 2 adhan. There's the adhan of the khutbah and there's the adhan of the salah time. Right? Salah time comes in at 12, or now is 1:18. So there's supposed to be adhan at 1:18, and then there's supposed to be a second adhan at the khutbah time. Traditionally. Or some of it even before. So you can even make it, the Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, he started that habit, but I don't want to get into all of that right now. But the sunnah that is before Jum'ah, you can pray starting 1:18. Make sense? The 4 rak'ah, you can start praying it starting 1:18. Once the khutbah is begun, the only sunnah you should pray is the 2 rak'ah of entering the masjid. You keep it brief and short. Is that, inshallah, I hope I didn't confuse you with other stuff. I don't want to get into all of those details right now. Just very short. You can make the 4 at the time of 1:18 when dhuhr comes in. And if the adhan has been made and you enter the masjid, you pray 2 rak'ah for entering the masjid. And you can intend 2 rak'ah along with that for Jum'ah. You can make 2 intentions. Only 2 rak'ah. Keep it short and brief. And then listen to the khutbah. Nothing more. Yes. For Jum'ah? Yeah. The sunnah for Jum'ah, you just make it the sunnah like dhuhr. You just make the sunnah, you pray sunnah till Jum'ah. Yeah. So you pray 4 before and 4 after. Yeah. But you pray them when the time enters, but not after the adhan is called. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you make 2,
2, yep. And there's also, it's allowed for you to combine all 4 into all 4 in one salah. You pray 2 rak'ah, tashahhud, you get up, pray 2 rak'ah, tashahhud, you give salam. So you can do all the 4 rak'ah before dhuhr and all the 4 rak'ah after dhuhr in one salah with 1 takbir and 1 salam. That's for witr, but that's for witr. For dhuhr is different. It looks like dhuhr salah. Yeah, it doesn't have the same, wallahu alam, the same hukum wouldn't apply for dhuhr. It wouldn't apply for dhuhr. But the better way is to separate them. But there are scholars that there's narration where, that it can be done all with one takbir and one salam. But the better way is to separate them. Some people, to keep it short, they do it with one takbir and one salam. They do 2 rak'at tashahhud, 2 rak'at. And I'm not sure if you skip the first tashahhud, there might be a position, and I gotta revise this, if you skip the first tashahhud and you just make it 4 straight. And that might be possible that you make the 4, that if you pray the 4 sunnah, you don't do first tashahhud, you pray 4 straight with 1 tashahhud. So I have to revise that. Inshallah, and check, inshallah ta'ala, what the position of the scholars are regarding skipping that first tashahhud if combining the sunnah. Like the witr. Yeah. And by the way, the Hanafi school, they actually, I believe they do 2 tashahhud for witr. That's the minority opinion. The majority say you only do 1 tashahhud for witr, but I believe the Hanafi school, they do 2 tashahhud for witr. But that's a later topic, inshallah ta'ala. All right, I apologize today, I'm resting on the wall. My back is a bit tight. All right, inshallah, I think that's, and so now we're going to get into the witr. Any questions about the sunan rawatib?
So, 10, right? Total 10.
The sunan mu'akkada are 10,
Not 12.
not 12. According to the commentator here, and we'll take that.
Yeah.
10, inshallah.
How about the Jummah? You said
4 before or 4 after. But the mu'akkada are 2 before, 2 after.
Oh.
The mu'akkada are 2 before, 2 after, but the total are 4. Or 4 before, 4 after. Because here, right, because he says there's 4 rak'ah before dhuhr, 4 after dhuhr, right? But the mu'akkada, he says 2 before dhuhr, 2 after dhuhr.
Jummah the same thing.
Jum'ah, same thing.
So total 10 at the end.
10 at the end. Not including the witr.
Yeah.
Out of all the sunnahs, the most important sunnah is the witr. That's why there's a separate section. Out of all the sunnahs, the most important sunnah you can pray is witr. In the Hanafi school, witr is wajib. If you don't pray witr, it's a sin. Like it's very important to that extent. So every Muslim is supposed to pray at least 1 rak'ah witr before they go to bed. Or at least 3 to 1. 3 is the minimum, they say adna al-kamal, like the minimum perfection is to pray 3. But if you pray 1, 1 is okay. You can pray 1 is with 1 rak'ah.
Make up, except we miss on that.
If you miss it, you can make it up.
But 2.
You make it 2. If you miss witr. Make sense?
Well, normally we are like that 12 rak'at, you pray to 12 rak'at mu'akkada, rawatib, you got like 1 pound in the Jannah. Do this one apply to the 10?
I believe so. There's many ahadith. It says like, I believe there's one hadith that says like whoever prays 4 before dhuhr and 4 after dhuhr, it will be a protection for him from the hellfire. Like there's many hadith that praise these sunan. The 2 before Fajr is better than the world and everything in it. So the sunnah, that's why it's so important. The Prophet ﷺ, he prayed it regularly. The only time he didn't pray is if he was traveling. When he was traveling, the Prophet ﷺ would only pray the witr and the sunnah of subh. The other sunnahs he wouldn't pray. So if you're traveling, you don't have to do the sunnah of Maghrib, Isha, Dhuhr, Asr. You don't have to do all that. You just do the sunnah of Fajr and witr. But if you're a resident, you do all of them. And there's many ahadith. We can read about their virtues in Riyadh al-Salihin. Inshallah, we were reading it before we stopped. But if we ever go back to it, there's many ahadith that speak about the virtue of praying the rawatib. There's a lot of ahadith about it. A lot. About each one there's a hadith.
So when we go to Makkah, Medina, we can do that. We can do that.
Yeah. If you go to Mecca, Medina, you should pray a lot of salah. A lot. The sunnah, this is if you're traveling, if you're traveling less than 6 days. If you're traveling more than 6 days, then you can pray your sunnah. Make sense? And if you're in Mecca and Medina, you don't have to, let's say you're traveling, you're in Mecca for like 2 days. You're traveling, you don't pray the rawatib, but you pray extra, general sunnah. Does that make sense? You don't do the rawatib, but you do as many sunnah. You go to Masjid Haram, do tawaf, pray. Do tawaf, pray. Do tawaf, pray. Dua, istighfar, Quran, go back. Because that's what you came for. You don't, right? You come for ibadah, right? So you want to use as much of your time as you can in ibadah, right? Some people, they go and they spend the ibadah a little bit, and the rest of it is they're shopping and at the hotel and stuff. It's okay, labas, but buffet and eating, it's okay. But we wanna, you travel, you spend your time, your money, your energy. You want to do ibadah, but at the same time also you have to pay attention to you. Again, you have to have fiqh of yourself. The deen this is very important. This deen is plenty. Take from it enough what you can handle. This deen is plenty, right? Take from it what you can handle, and don't overwhelm yourself, and grow. Right? That's what's important with the deen. The minimum is do the wajib, don't do haram. Then you increase the sunan, start with the rawatib. If you can't do rawatib, at least do witr and sunnah of fajr. Increase. If you can't do 5 salah and jama'ah, do 1. So take from the deen what you can handle. Because if you want to take it all, you're going to drown. You're going to drown. This hadith, وَلَنْ يُشَادَ الدِّينَ إِلَّا غَلَبَ. Nobody tries to become extreme with the deen except the deen will defeat him, will overwhelm him. So we have to, with the deen, you have to take from the deen enough for you to handle. If you try to do every hadith and every virtue and every ayah and everything, and to try to do everything the companions did and the Prophet ﷺ did, you're going to drown in the deen. You're going to drown and you're going to overwhelm yourself, and you're going to just. So again, but you also don't want to be lazy. The issue we have today is that people, we're not motivated. It's not that we work too hard. We don't work enough. You always have two extremes, right? There's people that are very unmotivated, right, and they don't make effort. And there are people, they work too hard to the point they don't know how to rest, right? So we don't want to be the first group or the second group. Right? We have to find that balance, inshallah. Have that fiqh of the deen. May Allah grant us fiqh. Ameen. Okay, let's continue with the witr, inshallah. The best time for witr is after the sunnah of Isha Salah, unless one intends to offer the tahajjud Salah. So if you intend to offer tahajjud, wait, pray your witr late at night. If you're not planning to offer tahajjud and you're going to sleep through the night, pray your witr before you go to bed, after Isha. Witr is a minimum of 1 rak'ah. The optimal is to perform 11 rak'ahs. 3 rak'ahs is the minimal optimal. Remember what I said? Minimal perfection is what I use. Minimal optimal. Minimal optimal rak'ah is 3. And one separates them by completing 2 rak'ahs with salam and then performs the final rak'ah. So the witr, you say 2 rak'ah, you give assalamu alaikum, and then you get up, you do 1 more. You can also pray all 3 together and just do 1 tashahhud at the end. Both are okay. Both are okay. Both are valid. For the witr, it's been narrated in that form. The Prophet ﷺ connected all 3 with only 1 tashahhud, and he separated it, he prayed 2 and he prayed 1. So the minimum is 1, the optimal is 11, the minimal optimal is 3. So if you're tired and you just want to I just want to do enough witr, khalas, bismillah. That 1 for you every day is better than you doing 11 and then never doing it again, right? So take that 1 and do it every day. So I would say, like, if you never pray witr, if that's not part of your life, it's not part of your schedule, pray 1 rak'ah witr every night. Start with that. Then, before you go to bed. Or after, even you pray in the masjid, after Isha, pray 2 rak'ah sunnah, pray 1 rak'ah witr, go home. Start with that. If you're not praying witr, start with that. Do 2 rak'ah sunnah after Isha, pray 1 rak'ah witr, go home, go sleep until Fajr. Khalas. If you're already praying 1 rak'ah, do 3.
How about Fajr time? About I wake up 4:30.
If you're gonna wake up for tahajjud, then you can wait till tahajjud time. Yeah, it's okay. That's better. So if you're waking up late at night, you pray tahajjud time. But if you cannot, maybe you sleep through the night, then you pray before bed. So if you sleep through the night, you pray before bed. But if you don't sleep through the night, you wait till before Fajr time. So you have to. So if you stay up, if you wake up early, then wait till the morning.
No,
Wait till like.
Fajr, first sunnah until we did.
Yep.
Come over here.
And then come, exactly. So that one is better. That's the best. Make sense? Yeah.
Now, already you say that you make intention for three rakat for witr, but you get the second rakat you tahajjud.
Don't make a number. When you pray intention for witr, don't ever intend a number. Just say I pray witr. And then you can pray 1, 3, 5, 11, 2, then 1, whatever you want. Just make intention with it. You don't have to specify the number. That's the better one. Because if you make intention for a specific number, then you have to pray that specific number. Does that make sense? So don't intend the number, pray. And then if you pray 3, 3. If you prayed 1, 1.
If you pray 3 but 2 you miss that.
And then you make the shahud, right?
That's what you get to do.
Yeah, exactly. So if you made the intention for 3, you have to do 3. You can't sit down.
Yeah, you sit down.
You get up.
Get up, right?
Yeah, you get up and you finish the salah. If you made the intention for 3. But the best solution is what? Don't intend a number. Don't make intention for a number.
What about for the sunnah of Zuhr for Jummah? So Jummah comes, the Adhan happens, you get up, and you just kept praying. So the 4, you made the intention for the 4.
But this is if the imam is out. If you made intention for the 4, you have to do 4.
Just stop at the 4.
You have to do 4. You can't continue. If you put a number on your intention, you're restricted to your number.
But if you don't put a number,
Then whatever the fiqh allows, whatever the ruling allows. Certain numbers, Allah have certain numbers. Like witr, you can do up to 11. You see, if you don't make a specific, pray up to 11, your choice. It makes sense? So if you don't put a number on, you can pray whatever the number allows. For dhuhr, you made intention for sunnah of dhuhr. The maximum sunnah of dhuhr is 4. You can't do more than 4. Make sense? So whatever the hukum allows, the number that is set for that prayer, that you have up to that number. So just to clarify for those who are listening and not present with us, the brother asked if you made the intention for dhuhr, and if you said a number, you have to pray that number. If you said 4, you do 4. Does that make sense? And if you said 2, you do 2. If you don't set a number, you can pray as much as the number of rak'at allowed for that prayer. For dhuhr, you're allowed to pray up to 4 rak'at before dhuhr. For witr, you're allowed up to 11. You can go up to that number. It's your choice. Make sense? Inshallah, I hope I suffice with that, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, and then he says, one recites Surah Al-A'la in the first rak'ah, Surah Al-Kafirun in the second rak'ah, and Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq, and Surah Al-Nas in the third rak'ah. So A'la, Kafirun, and then Ikhlas, Falaq, and Nas in the third. And if you just do Qul Huwa Ahad, Ikhlas is okay too. The Prophet ﷺ did that by itself as well. So you can do 3, or you can do just Surah Al-Ikhlas at the end, the last rak'ah. Taraweeh Salah, he said it is sunnah to perform Taraweeh, which is 20 rak'ahs of group prayer on each night of Ramadan. So that is the majority of our scholars, they prefer 20. That was the way of the Ummah for many centuries. Since the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, until maybe half a decade ago, or half a century, 50 years, 60 years. 12 this 8 rak'ah that we pray now, nobody in the Ummah prayed 8 rak'ah. It was very strange. Today the strange has become 20. But the way of the Ummah for pretty much since the time of Khilaf of Umar radiallahu anhu was 20 rak'ah. And that's the preference of our scholars. All 4 schools, they prefer 20 rak'ah. They said that is the sunnah, to do 20. And then, this new opinion came about that it should only be 8 because the Prophet ﷺ never prayed more than 11 rak'at. And so that's a very strange opinion that wasn't adopted by the 4 schools. And so again, like I said, today you have this claim that everybody's like, I'm on the sunnah, I'm on the sunnah. Like, you didn't discover the sunnah yesterday, brother. The Ummah knew the sunnah for centuries, and we had thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of scholars that studied the sunnah and knew it better than you did. And so, don't value the scholarship of the scholars before you. If you have an opinion that you prefer, which is fine, that's your opinion. But don't say that your opinion is the sunnah and everybody else's is not. Does that make sense? You make your opinion like my opinion is the deen. Everybody else's opinion is just fairy tales. It's me. My opinion, this is the deen. Whatever everybody else is saying, that's fairy tales. That's not the deen. That's very incorrect. Another sunnah is the duha prayer. It is sunnah to pray the duha prayer, which is a minimum of 2 rak'ahs, optimum 8 rak'ahs, and a maximum of 12. One completes the pair of rak'ahs with salam. So that's salat al-duha. You pray after the 20 minutes after the sunrise, all the way till a little before dhuhr. Duha prayer is an alternative for tahajjud. So if you can't do tahajjud, the alternative for tahajjud is praying duha prayer. So somebody like, oh, I want to pray at night, but it's hard for me to get up at night. I'm sleepy, heavy sleeper. I have work in the morning, whatever the reason is. Then we tell them, if you want to increase your ibadah, do duha prayer. You can do 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Optimal is 8. The Prophet did 8. There's some narration that says, 12, but 8 is good enough if you want to go that far. That's the alternative to tahajjud. So if you can do tahajjud, you do duha prayer.
Go back to the Tarawih, some people, they read 8, but they read slowly, but some people, they make 20 rak'ah, everybody fast, sometimes
Yeah.
Fatiha only one.
Yeah. No, you're supposed to read the Quran. Yeah. You're not supposed to read the Quran that fast. So we don't want to, the deen is always quality over quantity. Quality means the salah is good. The number is not as important as the khushu'. Right? So you rather pray 8 rak'ah with khushu' than 20 rak'ah, fast forward speed. So the quality is always more important than quantity in our deen. That's why the ayah says what? لِيَبَلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Allah says, He created life and death to test which one of you is best in deeds, not who has the most deeds. Akthar means the most. Allah doesn't want the most deeds. He wants the best deeds. Right? So we try to do the best, even if it's little. Right? So that's why it's important as well to have fiqh. Don't try to do so much, you're exhausted. Do enough, you enjoy it. And it affects your heart and it moves you. Right? And then go rest and do whatever you enjoy. Right? So that requires wisdom as well. You have to know enough to challenge yourself, but it be effective. And not too much where you burn yourself out and you become discouraged. That requires wisdom. To push yourself, but to the right limit. Right? And that's motivation too. Because the other person can say like Allah is Ghafoor Rahim, then I'm just going to take everything easy. That person doesn't have a lot of motivation. Right? So you have to have enough motivation to push yourself, but not overwhelm yourself. And everybody's limits are different based on their knowledge. If you have knowledge of tafsir and Quran and Arabic, you can pray longer because you understand the ayat. You enjoy it a lot more. You don't understand, it's harder. You pray 5 minutes, you get tired because you don't know the meaning of what you're reading. It's reality, right? So that's the truth. So the one who knows Quran and the meanings of Quran and they understand, they can pray long salah. They read 1 juz of Quran, it's okay. They enjoy it, they understand. Somebody, they don't understand it. It's harder because you're just standing. It's harder to focus, harder to get concentration, right? So you also have to take according to your knowledge. And that's why learning is important. Because the more you know, the easier to do ibadah. Because you understand more. You see? But when you have a little bit of knowledge, ibadah is very empty. Because you don't understand anything of the ibadah. Right? So that's why education is very, very important. Education is very, very important. Because without it, you have no substance. It's just performances. But it becomes empty because you don't know any meaning behind what you're doing, right? So inshallah Ramadan, we're going to do some tafsir. Also after Ramadan, we're going to do more tafsir inshallah. We're also going to do purifying the heart, how to connect the heart to Allah. Because right now we're just learning how to perform the salah. This is valid, but for your salah to be accepted by Allah is the heart. Allah looks at the heart. That's why the salah is accepted not based on how good you make ruku', sujood, long surah. That's not what's going to make your salah accepted. The salah is going to be accepted based on your heart. How good was your heart in your salah? How good is your heart outside of your salah? If your heart is good, then Allah accepts your salah. Your heart is arrogant, you have no. Even if you have the longest salah, you read the whole Quran. You have an arrogant heart, your salah is not accepted. You're oppressor, your salah is not accepted. You can make all the correct salah, read the whole Quran, best voice in the world. Your salah is not accepted. So those are two different things. Right now we're looking for validity. Validity, it means, okay, you met all the requirements for Sharia. The qalb, it says you met the requirements for Allah to accept your deed. Right, so that's why we have to always work on the heart. So inshallah we'll teach a class on how do we purify the heart. How do we connect our hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do you love Allah, fear Allah? Have all this awareness, khushu', khashya. There's so many things, rahba, raghba, trust, reliance on Allah, tawakkul, all of these iman, these are all meanings we have to do with our heart. It requires knowledge and training. And so, inshallah, that one we're going to have a time for it where we're going to teach that as well. So, the more knowledge you learn, the more sweeter the ibadah becomes. The less knowledge you have, the harder it becomes because you don't understand. You just perform because you have to do it, right? So we want to balance that together as well, inshallah ta'ala. All right, let's continue. And then the next part he says, tahajjud salah is also another sunnah. Is a nafil salah at night. It is an emphasized sunnah. Even if one can only do a little, the last part of the night is the best time to offer tahajjud salah. So tahajjud salah is to do at least even 2 rak'ah. Regarding witr, tarawih, there's this new thing the ummah is doing today that the ummah never used to do. They pray tarawih in the beginning, in the tarawih time. During the last 10 nights, they also add another tahajjud salah. That tahajjud salah, there's no practice of the ummah of doing that. That's a I don't want to say it's an innovation, but it's a form of innovation that the ummah never did. It's okay, it's permissible. And even congregation, the ummah never did that. So you can pray it, but to get the ajr of Ramadan, you just have to do tarawih. Tahajjud is just extra. But to get the main ajr of Ramadan, you just go do tarawih. Or you do tahajjud. But that's all. You don't have to do both. If you do both, it's more khair, it's more ibadah. But now we're trying to say which one is like the sunnah that for Ramadan. The sunnah for Ramadan is only tarawih. This other one, it has nothing to do with Ramadan. You're supposed to do it the whole year. Does that make sense? So that is okay. It's a good thing, but the way we're doing it now in congregation, last 10 days, everybody come, extra, that was never done by the ummah. So there's a lot of changes in the last century in the way the ummah is practicing tarawih and tahajjud. It's all permissible, but it wasn't the way of the ummah. It wasn't the way the ummah prayed their salah in the past. You would pray tarawih, you go home. During the last 10 nights, everybody, the community will encourage you to do more ibadah. If you did more ibadah, alhamdulillah. If you didn't do it, you're okay. Your salah, you're good. It was kind of you did something individually, now there's a congregational thing. It's not harmful. It's nothing harmful, but it wasn't the tradition of the ummah. It wasn't the tradition. And so that's a new practice, and it's not a bad one, but again, it's also not a sunnah that has been established. Yes. The i'tikaf, we're going to get to that, inshallah. Inshallah. That's not our section right now. It's just salah, so we're going to focus on salah, inshallah ta'ala. Then another sunnah he shares over here is tahiyatul masjid. It is sunnah for one who enters the masjid to greet the masjid by praying 2 rak'ahs each time he enters. One is no longer entitled to pray it after sitting. So tahiyatul masjid, you're supposed to pray when you enter the masjid. Once you sit down, the tahiyatul masjid is over. Once you sit down, tahiyatul masjid is over. So tahiyatul masjid, you pray when you enter the masjid.
Before adhan, after adhan.
It doesn't matter. Before adhan, after adhan. If the adhan is being made, wait till the adhan is done, and then make 3 intention together. You do tahiyatul masjid and you add the sunnah of adhan and everything else together.
Sunnah you can. Sunnah you pray after adhan.
Which sunnah?
Sunnah before zuhur, after.
Yeah, that one is after dhuhr. Yeah, that one is after the adhan. Because that one has to do with the prayer time. That one has to do with the prayer time. So that one you have to wait for the prayer time to come in for you to pray it. Another sunnah is that whenever today it's a bit hard, but whenever you enter a new city, the first place you're supposed to visit is the masjid and pray 2 rak'ah sunnah. That's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Whenever he would enter a city, he would go to the masjid, pray 2 rak'ah, and then go about his business. So we want to practice that as well. It's a little harder today. You get out of the airport, especially if you have a family, you get a rental car or you get picked up. You usually go straight to your hotel or to your relatives if you're staying with relatives, and so it is a bit more classically like you come in on your mount. So you're usually by yourself or maybe with a group of 1 or 2 people. So as you're on your mount, you go to the masjid, you pray your salah, then you go about your business in the city. So it's a little bit different today, a little bit harder, I guess, or not as convenient. But it's a sunnah that we're supposed to be practicing. Is when we enter a new city, you take your luggage, you get your rental car, whatever. First thing you do, search for the nearest masjid to the airport, go pray 2 rak'ah sunnah. in the masjid, and then do your business in the city, whatever you got to do afterwards. Go to your hotel or visit whoever you need to visit. All of that should be done afterwards. So that's another sunnah, inshallah, that we also want to practice and revive. We also talked about the sunnah that you can pray as many sunnahs as you want when you're like flying, on a car, on a train, on a bus, right? And so you can also do that. When you're on the airplane, you can just sit down, pray sunnah. You don't have to stand. And if you want, you can also read the Quran from your salah if you want to make it long. The Prophet used to pray salah, sunnah when he would travel. So today I know when we travel, it's usually, movies and TV shows and take a nap and, whatnot. And it's not haram. I don't think it's haram, Allahu alam. But especially if you're going on a sacred trip, you're doing Umrah, Hajj, you don't want to waste your trip, right? And may Allah forgive us all, we make these mistakes, But we want to, inshallah, try to teach ourselves, to occupy ourselves in ibadah. And all of this comes from knowledge. Because the more you know Allah, the more you want to spend time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So we have to have that ma'rif of Allah. And knowing Allah doesn't mean you know halal haram. It means you have the science of the heart and the science of iman. You know the names of Allah, you know akhirah, you know jannah, nar. You have fear. You have always, your heart is always connected to Allah. You always make dhikr. You always make shukr. You always make thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You always in the, you see Allah's attributes and His beauty everywhere. Everything is speaking Allah's name. If you think of the whole world as a mirror, and the whole world is reflecting Allah's beautiful attributes and names. So everywhere we see Allah's greatness. So that's the connection. When you have that type of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you understand Quran and you make salah, you feel you are where you belong. And when you're out of salah, you feel a stranger. Right? That was the way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? When he would pray salah, that was his pleasure and comfort. Right? So that takes some development, but that's where we want to be, inshallah ta'ala. Let's continue, inshallah. Here we're going to quickly talk about some of the ahkam that pertain to jama'ah, praying in congregation, some rulings that pertain to that, inshallah. He says, the intention for being an imam is wajib in 4 conditions. So you have to make intention to be imam in 4 places. Number 1 is Jum'ah Salah. The imam has to make the intention to lead the prayer. Otherwise, the salah for him is not valid, because Jum'ah has to be done in congregation. If he doesn't make that intention, then he's not praying in congregation. Make sense? He has to make the intention that he's leading the salah. Number 2, to repeat the fard or nafil salah in its time, hoping for reward. Wal-mu'adah. Wal-mu'adah. And so he says to repeat the fard or nafil salah in its time, hoping for reward. In the commentary, he commentates on 76. He said, to repeat the fard salah that was performed in its time, or nafil salah which was sunnah to perform in jama'ah, except for witr in Ramadan, in the month of Ramadan, because there is no repetition for witr, and repeat them once, or repeat them both on their time with the jama'ah in the entire salah, hoping for the reward of jama'ah. So here is, if a person is repeating a salah, it could be a nafil salah or a fard, and now you're praying like dhuhr a second time. You're praying dhuhr a second time and you're leading the jama'ah. In that case, you have to make the intention of jama'ah for you to get, and it's obligatory in that case, according to the author. I am not 100% clear on this mas'ala, and so inshallah I will refer to my commentary on the book, and inshallah comment on that later. Number 3, he said a vowed salah that is to be performed in congregation. If you make this intention that, wallahi, I'm going to perform this salah in congregation, then you have to make the intention of jama'ah, and if you're the imam, the intention of imam. And number 4, a salah offered before its time due to rain. If the imam is offering a salah before its time because of rain or snow, then he has to make the intention that he's leading as an imam. And these are just very small technicalities about intention, which inshallah ta'ala we will just kind of gloss over without diving into too much. Another shurut about imamah, about the leading of salah, he says the condition for following an imam are 11. If you want to follow an imam, there are 11 conditions. Number one, the follower should not know of any invalidity of the salah of the imam due to ritual impurity or anything else. So pretty much it says you cannot follow an imam who you think has broken his wudu. If you think the imam doesn't have wudu, you can't pray behind him. Even if the imam thinks he has wudu, but if you know that he doesn't have wudu, then you can't pray behind him. That's the takeaway there. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? If you're praying behind an imam, maybe you know he broke his wudu, but he doesn't remember. Can you pray behind him? No. Because you know he broke his wudu. Does that make sense? Huh? Yeah, and you mentioned to him, right? But if you didn't mention to him and he's praying, you don't have to yell and fight. You just go make your salah by yourself. You don't pray with him. Is that clear? Because for him, he thinks he has wudu. But you know he doesn't have wudu. Do you pray behind him? You don't pray behind him. Make sense? Yes. Yes. We'll get to that inshallah. Jum'ah, we'll get to Jum'ah. Jum'ah will come up inshallah. It's actually very close. And then he said, number two, it should not be such that according to the madhab of the ma'moom, the salah of the imam is invalid and has to be repeated. So this is the issue of madhabs, is that this is a fiqh issue. If you know the imam's salah has to be repeated or his wudu is nullified, according to your opinion, can you pray behind him? Does that make sense? So for example, in the Hanafi school, they don't wipe over socks. They're very strict. And let's say the imam, he's leading the salah and he wiped over his socks. Can they pray behind the imam? The majority of the scholars, they say, no, you can't pray behind him. You can't pray behind him. The majority of the later scholars, they say, no. If, in your opinion, if what he's doing is not valid, you can't pray behind him. You pray behind him as a sunnah if you want, at most, but you don't pray behind him as the fard. But they say in general, you don't pray behind him. Majority of the early generations, or at least a large number of the early generation scholars, they say no. They say you pray behind the imam. Even if according to your opinion his wudu or salah is not valid, but if he's following a valid opinion according to his school, you still pray behind him. Does that make sense? This created a lot of fitna in the ummah, where an imam would not pray behind another imam because they say, according to our school, your salah is not valid, so we're not going to pray behind you. Does that make sense? It created a lot of fitna. Hanafis would not pray behind Shafi'is, Shafi'is would not pray behind Hanafis because of the differences of these opinions. But there's narrations like of the early scholars from like the Salaf, the first and second generation, and even third, that they would pray behind each other even if they found like their opinions to be different. So, like one imam was questioned, would you pray behind, Imam so-and-so? He said, yes, I would. But they said, yeah, Imam, this imam, he doesn't think the bleeding nose breaks the wudu. Because according to, I believe the Hanafi school, if you have a bloody nose, it breaks your wudu. The Shafi'i school, if you have a bloody nose, it doesn't break your wudu. So they're like, would you pray behind an imam who has a bloody nose? Because in your school, it breaks his wudu. He said, yes, I would. Because he's following an opinion of a valid scholar. Although it's not the opinion that I follow. Make sense? And so that opinion is, so I personally don't adopt the second opinion, that if your imam's worship is invalid, according to your opinion, that you don't pray behind him. I think that's incorrect, and a weaker opinion, and that the classical opinion of many of our scholars is that no, regardless of difference of opinion, if somebody is following the valid opinion of a scholar of Ahl Sunnah, you still pray behind them, and you don't, cause division within the ummah. Does that make sense? Huh?
Can we pray like Shia do Imam?
No, we don't pray behind Shia, and Shia is not Ashariya, the 12ers. But if the Shias are different groups.
Yeah, we don't know.
In general, I would say don't pray behind the Shia. In general, unless you know that they're not the 12er, unless you know they're like the Zaydi Shia, they're the closest Shia to the Sunnah. But if you don't know who they are, in general, don't pray behind the Shia, because they have some really problematic issues of aqidah. We respect them as Muslims. We don't say they're not Muslim. It's not that we're saying they're out of Islam. In general, they're Muslims. But we don't follow them in salah. We don't follow them in salah. Is that clear? Alhamdulillah. I mean, the brothers that are from Iraq and that region, Pakistan, certain area, they deal with this. Huh? I mean, if you don't know, khalas, you have no blame. If you don't know, if you know that point, right? But if you don't know, you don't know. What can you do about it? Make sense? Yeah. So you're not responsible for what's in the hearts of people. You're responsible for what you know. So if you know this person is a Shi'i and he has these beliefs, then don't pray behind them.
No, they pray there, we pray our own.
That's fine too. They can pray their own. You pray respect, mutual respect, especially if it's a shared space. You're at work. It's a musalla for everybody to share. School, it's a prayer area for. Khalas, let them pray their prayer. You pray your prayer. You don't have to enforce because it's not your position to enforce anything, right? But if this is a masjid established by Ahl Sunnah, then it's for Sunnah. If it's a masjid established by the Shia, then it's their masjid. We don't infringe upon their rights. They don't infringe upon our rights. And the Shias are ranks. I know in Yemen, like the Zaydi Shia, they're very close to Ahl Sunnah. We used to pray behind them. So they're not all the same. And there's only very specific issues that are not major issues that are different. And so Ahl Sunnah, the scholars in generally permitted praying behind the Zaydis. And we pray behind them, and I used to pray at their masajid and so on in Yemen. And so the Shias are not all the same as well. But if you don't know, just refrain, pray by yourself, don't enforce anything on anybody. Everybody has the right to do what they want. And unless a space is designated for a specific group, then at that point, you have to respect the authority of that group. Make sense? All right, number 3, he says the imam should not be a follower. You cannot pray behind an imam who's following somebody else. Make sense? Like if I'm the imam and Zubair is praying behind me, you cannot follow Zubair, you have to follow me. Make sense? You can't follow somebody who's following an imam. Does that make sense? But you can use that person as a signal for what the imam is doing. Does that make sense? So you're not following them, but they're a signal for you. So I'm leading salah, Zubair is following me, but you're in a different room. You can't see what I'm doing. The power is off and you can't hear me. But you can see Zubair. So you see Zubair moving, you start moving. You see him get up, you get up. He goes down, you go down. You're not following him, you're following the imam, but he's a signal of what the imam is doing. That's okay. But you can't make the intention, okay, I'm praying behind Zubair. He's my imam. That's not okay.
Like some people, like the microphone off, he live for the door there, the lady cannot hear you. Can he repeat how he made tension?
No, so if the power turns off and you lose, so the question is what happens if you lose complete connection to the imam? If you can see somebody praying behind the imam, just follow their example. If you can. If you can. A lot of times, most masajid today, the women, if the power is off, they can't see the imam. And they can't hear the imam. Right? And so what do? They finish their salah on their own. They finish their salah by themselves.
Yeah, so some people, they make you repeating. Like you might say Allah for
Yeah, I mean, if we can raise our voices, we should. But I'm saying, if you can't. But if we can raise our voices, we should. So that they can hear. And then what do? So this is the case. Again, the brother asked, how about if we raise our voices and the women can hear? Then we should. Every time the imam makes takbir, everybody makes takbir so that the women can hear, the women follow along, right? But what do when they can't hear the Quran? They recite their own Quran. Make sense? Does that make sense? Again, I'm going to reiterate that. The imam is leading salah. The power is off. The women can't see the imam and they can't even hear what Quran he's reciting. They can't hear anything. But they can hear the men when they say Allahu Akbar and Sami Allahu liman hamida. They still follow the imam. But for the Quran portion, they read their own Quran. They don't stay silent and do nothing. You don't stay silent and do nothing. You read the Quran. They read it for themselves. But for the movements, they follow the brothers who are making the voices, who are raising their voices. Does that make sense? Let's say you enter a masjid and there is a khutbah going on. Jum'ah khutbah. But you can't hear the khutbah. But you see everybody, but the khutbah, especially here in the West, the speaker is only indoor. You're outdoor, you can't hear the khutbah, but you can see the people inside the masjid. What do? Do you just sit silently? No, you make dhikr. Read Quran, make dhikr, make dua. Because you can't hear the khutbah. You're not interfering with the khutbah. You're too far away. But you're still part of the congregation. Does that make sense? You make dhikr, you make dua. And then when they get in salah, you can't hear the imam reading Quran. You read your own Quran. But you follow the movement of the congregation. Does that make sense? So this is the case. You're following an imam, but you can't hear everything. The times you can't hear, you make your own dhikr. But you follow the rest of the movements of the jama'ah. Any question? Is that clear? Is that clear? How we deal with that situation?
Yeah, really clear. I just say, like, simple, for him, do him intention, he think like lady don't hear your law or for anything, he's okay to say that? Oh, he's okay to raise the voice?
Yeah, it's okay to raise the voice. That's completely fine. It's actually encouraged. In that type of circumstance, when nobody can hear, you should. Because we want to وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى, help each other in doing good. So that's a good thing, right? So in that circumstance, you raise your voice. It's okay. Yes, brother.
Yeah, the first line, usual, or the second line, usual, hear the Quran.
Yes.
When say Ameen, so all the Jama'ah will say Ameen.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that case, so they hear that Ameen. So that means they understand when the Ameen comes, so they can read the Fatiha.
Yes.
So in that case, so they can still wait for Allah Akbar, Takbir, the Allah, somebody would be, maybe the last person can say that. But when the Ameen, they hear that, then that's the time that they're going to start to read the Quran.
Yes. But so the brother said, can they use the signal of Ameen to allow them to start reading Fatiha, right? That's the question, right? So they hear Ameen, now can they use that signal to start reading Fatiha? The issue here with the question is, you're assuming that they can hear what the Imam is reading. If you cannot hear what the Imam is reading, you don't have to wait for Ameen or anything. Read as much Quran as you can. Do you understand? If you cannot hear what the Imam is reading, read as much Quran. Read Surah Al-Baqarah, read Fatiha, read Surah Al-Baqarah, as much as you can. If you can't hear the Imam, read. If you're able to follow his harakah, you follow the harakat. And then you read your own Quran, your own Fatiha, your own everything. Make sense? Amma, if you can't hear anything, you can't hear Fatiha, you can't hear Takbir, you can't hear anything, finish the salah by yourself. You're in the second raka'ah, Taraweeh, all the power turns off. The women's prayer section is on the second floor. They can't hear the men. They're completely disconnected. There's no sound. We tell the women, finish your third and fourth raka'ah by yourself. Continue your salah by yourself. And the men, they can still hear the imam. They finish with the imam. Make sense? So if you can't hear anything, you finish the salah by yourself. If you can't hear the takbir, you read the Quran by yourself. Make sense? And if you can hear everything, of course, you'll be silent when the imam is reciting, except for Fatiha. Did we clarify how this whole issue is if you're disconnected from the imam in the possible scenarios? No, the imam doesn't turn left and right. His voice should be conveyed by the people behind him. Wallahu a'lam. Make sense? All right.
One thing. No, you make intention follow imam, right? But you hear this cannot, you have to break a weapon with
Yeah,
imam,
if you
or-
can't hear the imam, you break away from the imam. Yeah.
individual.
If you can't hear, because that's what the women are going to do, right? If they lose complete connection with the imam, what are they going to do? Break away from the imam. You can't follow a person who you have no connection to. There has to be at least some visibility or some auditory signal. If there's nothing you can hear, nothing you can see, then you break away. Make sense? You can also break away from an imam whose salah is too hasty. This imam, he's praying salah very hasty. You're not even able to finish Fatiha. The salah is just like, he's like a chicken just pecking the floor all day, Don't pray behind that person. Break away from them. Break away from them. Because they're not praying properly. Does that make sense? So pray, it's okay. So you can break away from the imam. And in that case, you can't hear anything, you break away.
I saw, I observed somebody like travel and they
We're going to get to traveling. The ahkam of traveling is separate. We're almost there. We just have too many questions, so we're getting too many interruptions, but we're almost there, inshallah. Let's continue. Number 4, he says, nor an illiterate person. So the imam should know. What is an illiterate? What is ummi? In salah, illiterate person is someone that cannot recite Fatiha correctly. If somebody cannot recite Fatiha correctly, you shouldn't pray behind them. Yeah. But some later fatwas came because people that recite Fatiha incorrectly became too many. Do you understand? There's a fatwa the scholars produced. They said the accent in Fatiha has become very prominent because of, first of all, many non-Arabs entered in the fold of Islam. And so they don't have the Arabic tongue. So that's just an obstacle that is there linguistically. The other second issue that happened was people don't learn from scholars anymore. People think that I learned as a kid, so I know everything. And the problem when you learn in childhood, you rarely pay attention to the details as a kid. Effective learning happens in adulthood. The best learning happens when you're an adult. Childhood is more systemic learning. There's a curriculum. You're learning repetition over and over and over. You learn that way as a kid. But if you want to get quality learning, it happens as an adult. Because you're mature enough to appreciate what's being taught. You're mature enough to pay attention to the particulars of what's being taught and to apply it. And so one of the fitan that happens is everybody's learning Fatiha in childhood, but then in their adulthood, nobody wants to really seek knowledge to make sure they're learning the deen correctly. Right? So this is one of the fitan. So because of this, a fatwa were given that even if somebody has, accent in Fatiha and they're reading it incorrectly, you can still pray behind them. It's a minority fatwa. I don't encourage it, but it could be adopted. It could be adopted. I've seen imams who read Fatiha incorrectly. Some of the mistakes I've seen is, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. They're saying the ha as a ha. It disturbs me because I know that salah, the person doesn't know, so they're excused. But technically, they're considered illiterate. In fiqh, we call that person illiterate. They can't recite Fatiha correctly. They have a major accent. Right? They're saying Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. They're excused for themselves, but they shouldn't be leading salah with that type of accent. Unless they're leading people of their level. Of their level, it's okay. But if they're leading people who are more qualified, the more qualified person should lead the salah. Make sense? Again, there's a second opinion that says if it's a common accent, Westerners, for example, because Americans, we don't have ha in English. So they struggle. They don't know how to pronounce Ahmed. They say Ahmed. A lot of Americans, they struggle. And it's not to shame them. Again, it's completely fine. And they could be more righteous and closer to Allah than we are. From a fiqh perspective, though, they're considered illiterate because of their major accent. So they shouldn't be the ones leading salah, although they could be more righteous and more beloved to Allah. Does that make sense, the difference between the two? So we're not judging or undervaluing anybody, but we're also clarifying the ahkam in this scenario. Another one that, again, I spoke about Fatiha, right? Even like people that come from Muslim-born families and Muslim cultures and backgrounds, Sirat al-lazina an'amta al-lazina. A person reading al-lazina, they're considered ummi. They're considered illiterate. It shouldn't be al-lazina, it should be al-lazina. Unless they can't do, even if they can't do it, they have a major accent. The person who can read the Quran with the best tajweed should lead. Does that make sense? If they're saying sirat al-ladina, they're saying sirat al-ladina. There's a major accent. So that is why the scholars, they made this exception, this late fatwa. Why? Because most Muslim nations have these major accents. You go to different regions of the world. In East Africa, you find this. In this country, you find that. In this country, West Africa, in the Indian subcontinent, you find this accent. In Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, you find that accent. Like it's become so widespread. The scholars said, okay, khalas, la bas. If this is the accent of the people, don't overwhelm them. Just pray behind them. Classically, though, they said what? If the person has these accents, they're considered illiterate. And if you can recite Fatiha correctly, you shouldn't pray behind them. That's the classical. But again, there's a principle in Sharia that says إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَ. When something becomes too widespread and too hard, they say you make the ruling easier for people. There's a Sharia principle. Because the Sharia is mercy. So it doesn't burden people with more than they can bear. So that's why where this group of scholars, they came from, they said, listen, this accent in Fatiha has become too common. Take it easy on the people. Let them pray behind each other. Even if you can recite Fatiha properly and they have an accent because of their mother tongue, don't stress them. Pray behind them. Does that make sense? Where that fatwa is coming from? So we can adopt that inshallah ta'ala. But we also, again, I want to encourage everyone. We live in the age of technology. Zoom, you can be connected to the big qari of a Muslim world by just paying a few dollars a month and go online. So we have to make that little effort to correct our tajweed, have a sheikh. Having a sheikh should be something we have till the day we die. We read with our scholars, read with our teachers, and alhamdulillah, like, the Muslim world is facing so much poverty, and you can get a highly qualified Quran scholar to teach you for a few dollars. So that's something we can afford, and we have the means. And so I encourage everyone, sign up for a Quran class. Find a Quran teacher, somebody from Azhar, some of these prominent universities. They're available for very affordable prices. So we should take advantage of that so we can make sure our tajweed and our pronunciation of the Quran is correct and accurate. Number 5, he said the ma'moom should not stand ahead of the imam. So the imam should be the one in the front. So if you come to Jum'ah and the masjid is full, you shouldn't be praying in front of the imam. Go to the back if you like, but don't pray on the street behind the imam. But don't go in front of the imam. Does that make sense? Don't go in front of the imam. You can't do that. Number 7, he said the imam and the ma'moom are in the masjid or approximately 300 arms lengths apart. If this is talking about if the masjid, the distance. How much distance can there be behind an imam and ma'moom? In the masjid, the distance doesn't matter. You can pray behind the imam even if you're 10 miles away from him, as long as it's within the same masjid facility. You understand? As long as it's like in the haram, it's a massive facility, right? You and the imam can be a mile apart, 2 miles apart. It's fine, it's permissible because you're in the masjid. Outside the masjid, there shouldn't be more than 300 arm lengths apart between you and the imam. Does that make sense? All right. Did I guess the ma'moom should be aware of the movements of his imam? Yes. So again, we talked about that earlier, right? You have to know what the movements. You don't have to hear the Quran, but you have to know the movements. And that can be by the signal of somebody else that's following the imam. Number 8, the ma'moom intends to follow the imam or the congregation. So you can make any of those intentions. You follow the imam or you follow the congregation. Number 9, the imam and ma'moom conform to each other in the movement of salah. Alright, so a person who is offering a farz salah cannot follow a person who is offering a salatul kusuf. Meaning that the formation of their prayer is the same. The formation of their prayer is the same. There's only some prayers that have a different formation, like the lunar and solar eclipse prayer. This lunar and solar eclipse prayer, we're not going to talk about it, but I'm just going to say it has 2 ruku'. You know how there's 2 sujood in prayer and 1 ruku'? The lunar and solar eclipse prayer have 2 ruku' just like there's 2 sujood. The format of that prayer is different than the format of the other salawat. So if you pray in the eclipse prayer, it happened to me once. I came to Fajr prayer late when I was in the university. And I thought the congregation is praying Fajr. I entered the salah. And they're praying a lunar eclipse prayer. And I'm thinking they're praying the Fajr prayer. I'm praying behind them. As I'm praying behind them, they go for ruku'. They say, Sami Allah liman hamidah. They're reading Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I'm like, what is going on? I realized they're praying the eclipse prayer. So in that case, I have to break off and pray my salah by myself. Does that make sense? So you can't follow the imam who's praying a lunar or solar eclipse prayer with a different format. Because that prayer has a different format. It has 2 ruku'. We're not used to it because nowadays, nobody's in the masjid, especially in the West, in the Muslim world, the salah can be heard whenever there's an eclipse. Here in the West, the masajid announce it. Some of the masajid announce it. And if they do announce it, very little to no one shows up. There was an eclipse a few months ago. And I think maybe 2 or 3 masajid held a prayer for it. So this is a sunnah that we have to bring back in the Western society and in our masajid in the Western societies. And number 10, he said the ma'moom should not differ with the imam regarding those sunnahs which do not permit contradiction. And so again, you can't differ in format from the imam. If you want, I will recommend you refer to the notes in the footnotes, inshallah ta'ala. I'll stop with here. I wanted to get into the last section, but we don't have to. We don't have time. We're going to talk about the ruling of a man praying behind a woman praying behind a man, and those rulings. And inshallah ta'ala, what is valid and what's not valid. And then we're going to get into the ahkam of combining prayer tomorrow night. So can you combine dhuhr and asr, and traveling, sickness, rain, all of that, inshallah. And then after that is Jum'ah. So we have 2 more nights before we finish Salah. I was hoping we would finish tomorrow night, but I think we're going to need until Wednesday night to finish Kitab al-Salah. And then we'll do Zakah and Sawm, and then inshallah ta'ala. بارك الله فيكم وجزاكم الله خير وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والحمد لله رب العالمين. وإياكم. وإياكم حاجي.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah. Asyhadu an la أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله illallah